"You're not flying today." The sentence cut through the noise of Terminal C with enough force to make nearby conversations pause. A businessman lowered his coffee cup. A family seated near the giant airport windows stopped talking. Even a gate agent working 2 stations away glanced over. Naomi Carter looked at the airline supervisor standing in front of her and said nothing. She wore dark jeans, white sneakers, and a charcoal sweater. No designer logos. No expensive jewelry. Nothing that suggested she had spent the last decade building one of the most successful technology companies in America. To everyone around Gate B-17, she looked like an ordinary traveler trying to catch an afternoon flight from Dallas to Seattle. Melissa Grant folded her arms and held Naomi's boarding pass between her fingers. The supervisor's expression carried the kind of certainty people often displayed when they believed they had already figured someone out. "I already explained the situation," Melissa said. "There appears to be an issue with your reservation." Naomi remained calm. "What issue?" Melissa glanced down at the boarding pass before looking back up. "That's being reviewed." The answer sounded official. It also explained absolutely nothing. Around them, passengers waiting for business class boarding watched with growing curiosity. Some looked at Naomi. Others looked at Melissa. A few exchanged quiet whispers. The judgment started spreading before anyone knew a single fact. Naomi had seen that happen her entire life. Years earlier, when she was a college student traveling home for Thanksgiving, she had experienced the same thing. Different airport, different faces, same assumptions. Back then, she had been younger and less prepared. Experience had changed that. Now she simply observed. The details mattered. They always did. A young airline employee named Jordan Reed sat behind a nearby computer terminal. He glanced toward the screen in front of him and then toward Naomi. Something about the situation seemed to bother him, though he said nothing. Melissa tucked the boarding pass behind the counter. "For now, you'll need to step aside." Naomi looked toward the boarding lane. Passengers were still moving smoothly onto the aircraft. Nobody was being delayed. Nobody was being inconvenienced. Yet somehow she had become the problem. "Am I being denied boarding?" she asked. Melissa hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Your status is under review." Again, no explanation. Again, no facts. A businessman standing near the boarding line shook his head. "There's always somebody holding things up," he muttered to another traveler. Naomi heard him. She heard all of them. She simply chose not to respond. Silence often revealed more than arguments ever could. She picked up her carry-on bag and walked to an empty seat facing the gate. Then she sat down. Melissa frowned. The reaction was not what she expected. Most passengers would have argued. Some would have demanded a supervisor. Others would have called customer service. Naomi simply sat and waited. Across the gate area, Jordan checked something on his screen. His eyebrows pulled together. He checked again. The result appeared to surprise him. Meanwhile, Melissa continued helping other passengers board. Each boarding pass was scanned within seconds. Smiles were exchanged. Greetings were offered. Everything moved normally. Everything except the situation involving Naomi Carter. Several minutes passed. Naomi remained seated. Calm. Patient. Completely unbothered. Then she removed her phone, typed a brief message, and pressed send. No explanation. No visible concern. She slipped the phone back into her bag and looked toward the entrance of the concourse. A faint smile appeared on her face before quickly disappearing. Nobody noticed except Jordan Reed. And for the first time that afternoon, he began to wonder whether the woman sitting quietly across the gate knew something that nobody else in Terminal C knew yet. Melissa Grant expected many reactions after taking the boarding pass and placing it behind the counter. Anger would have made sense. Frustration would have made sense. Even walking away would have made sense. What did not make sense was Naomi Carter sitting calmly in a chair as if she had all the time in the world. The supervisor remained behind the counter, watching her with growing irritation. Around them, passengers continued boarding, but far more slowly than before. People kept looking back. The story felt unfinished. Naomi rested her carry-on beside her chair and folded her hands. She appeared completely at ease. That was what unsettled Melissa most. A person with nothing to stand on usually became nervous. Naomi looked like someone standing on solid ground. Across the gate area, a young airline employee named Jordan Reed glanced repeatedly between Naomi and his computer screen. He had witnessed the entire exchange. Something about it bothered him. The reservation issue Melissa kept mentioning did not match what he remembered seeing earlier. Jordan turned toward his terminal and quietly searched the passenger manifest again. A few seconds later, Naomi Carter's name appeared on the screen. Confirmed reservation. Business class. Seat 3A. No warnings. No restrictions. No issues. Jordan frowned. He checked a second time, then a third. The information remained exactly the same. Nearby, Melissa was speaking to another employee. Some people think the rules do not apply to them, she said loudly enough for several passengers to hear. The comment drew a few nods from travelers who knew nothing about the situation. Assumptions were easier than facts. Naomi heard the remark but did not respond. Years of experience had taught her that people often revealed themselves when they believed there would be no consequences. The terminal buzzed with the usual sounds of rolling luggage, distant announcements, and conversations blending together. Yet Gate B-17 felt isolated from the rest of the airport. The tension had created its own atmosphere. A businessman standing near the window glanced toward Naomi. If there was really a problem with the reservation, security would already be here, he quietly told the woman beside him. She nodded. Others were starting to ask similar questions. The narrative Melissa had created was beginning to crack. Jordan finally stood and walked toward the counter. "Melissa," he said carefully, "can I ask something?" She barely looked up. "What?" Jordan lowered his voice. "The reservation is showing active." Melissa's expression hardened instantly. "Then you are looking at the wrong record." "I checked several times." "Check again." Jordan hesitated. "I already did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Naomi noticed the exchange from across the gate. So did several passengers nearby. Melissa leaned closer. "The passenger is not boarding. That decision has already been made." Jordan looked back at his screen. The facts had not changed. The reservation was still valid. The seat was still assigned. The passenger still belonged on the flight. Across the waiting area, Naomi reached into her bag and removed her phone. She looked at the screen for only a few seconds before typing a short message. Then she pressed send. No explanation. No visible concern. She slipped the phone back into her bag and looked toward the entrance of the concourse. The faint smile that appeared on her face lasted only a moment, but Jordan saw it. And for the first time that afternoon, he began to wonder whether Naomi Carter knew something nobody else at Gate B-17 knew yet. Jordan Reed could not stop looking at the reservation record. The more he checked it, the less sense the situation made. Naomi Carter's seat remained assigned. The payment was confirmed. Every system indicator showed exactly what he expected to see for a legitimate business class passenger. Yet somehow she was still sitting outside the aircraft while the boarding process continued around her. Across Gate B-17, Melissa Grant seemed determined to maintain control of the situation. "Some passengers think waiting long enough will change the answer," she announced loudly enough for several travelers to hear. Several people glanced toward Naomi. A few nodded. Others looked uncertain. The crowd was beginning to divide into two groups. One group trusted the authority standing behind the counter. The other group trusted what they had witnessed with their own eyes. Naomi remained seated with her carry-on beside her chair. She did not defend herself. She did not explain herself. The silence created a strange effect. The less she said, the more people studied her. A businessman in a navy blazer folded his arms. Earlier he had assumed Melissa was right. Now he was not so sure. If she really did something wrong, why is nobody explaining what it was? He quietly asked another traveler. The question lingered in the air. Nobody had an answer. Melissa continued speaking as though the facts were already settled. "The airline has procedures for a reason," she said. "Not everyone likes the outcome." Again the statement sounded official. Again it avoided specifics. Jordan noticed the pattern. Every explanation seemed designed to sound convincing without actually explaining anything. Nearby, another airline employee approached the counter. Melissa spent several moments speaking quietly with him before pointing toward Naomi. The employee looked over, studied Naomi for a second, then nodded. The exchange did not go unnoticed. Several passengers watched it happen. Assumptions were being made before conversations were taking place. Naomi saw it too. She had spent enough years in executive meetings to recognize when people formed conclusions before gathering evidence. The setting was different. The behavior was not. Outside the terminal windows, a jet slowly pushed away from a gate and began moving toward the runway. Inside, time felt strangely suspended. Naomi checked the time on her phone, then looked toward the entrance of the concourse again. The same calm confidence remained on her face. Jordan noticed it. The businessman noticed it. Even Melissa noticed it. That confidence was becoming difficult to ignore. "You seem very comfortable for someone who may not be boarding today," Melissa finally said. The comment drew several curious looks from nearby passengers. Naomi lifted her eyes. "Who said that decision has been made?" Melissa frowned. "The boarding door will close soon." Naomi gave a small nod. "Then I suppose we should see what happens next." The response created another ripple through the crowd. It was not emotional. It sounded more like certainty. Melissa looked away first. Jordan felt it immediately. Something was changing. The assumptions that had filled Gate B17 earlier were beginning to lose their power. People were paying closer attention now. They were questioning, observing, thinking. Then Naomi's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and read a new message. A faint smile appeared. Whatever she had just read seemed to confirm exactly what she had been expecting all along. Jordan Reed watched Naomi for several more seconds before returning to his terminal. The message she had received clearly meant something, but there was no way to know what. What he did know was that the reservation records sitting on his screen still refused to support anything Melissa Grant had been claiming. Seat 3A remained active. Payment remained verified. Every system indicator remained green. The facts had not changed. Yet somehow Naomi Carter was still sitting outside the aircraft while the boarding process neared its conclusion. Across Gate B17, Melissa could feel control slowly slipping away. Earlier, passengers had accepted her authority without question. Now they were asking questions she could not comfortably answer. The businessman in the navy blazer remained standing near the boarding lane instead of entering the jet bridge. The woman near the charging station continued watching every interaction. Even a retired couple seated near the window had stopped pretending to read and were openly observing the situation. The attention made Melissa uncomfortable. She preferred quick compliance. She preferred situations that ended before people started thinking too deeply. Naomi's calm presence had prevented that. "Final boarding will begin shortly," Melissa announced. Her voice carried across the gate area. Normally, that statement would have triggered immediate movement. Instead, several travelers remained where they were. Curiosity had become stronger than routine. Jordan glanced at the departure clock. Time was running short. If the flight departed on schedule, the boarding door would close within minutes. Yet Naomi showed no concern whatsoever. She sat quietly with her carry-on beside her chair and occasionally looked toward the entrance of the concourse. The confidence in her expression seemed completely disconnected from the situation unfolding around her. A middle-aged woman finally approached Naomi. She had been sitting near the charging station for almost half an hour. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I hope you do not mind me asking, but are you waiting for someone?" Several nearby passengers immediately paid attention. Naomi looked up and smiled politely. "Yes." The woman nodded. "Someone from the airline?" Naomi considered the question. Someone who believes decisions should be based on facts. The answer only increased the mystery. The woman returned to her seat, but the conversation spread through the waiting area almost immediately. People began exchanging theories. Some assumed Naomi had contacted customer relations. Others guessed she knew a senior manager. A few suspected she might be an attorney. Nobody came close to the truth. Behind the counter, Melissa overheard the whispers and became increasingly irritated. She stepped toward Naomi. "You seem very confident that this situation will somehow change." Naomi looked at her. Situations change when people finally have all the information. Melissa folded her arms. "The information is already clear." Naomi held her gaze for a moment. Then explaining it should be easy. The silence that followed was impossible to ignore. Several passengers exchanged looks. Jordan looked down at his screen. Melissa turned away first. The answer she needed was not there because it had never been there. At that exact moment, another message appeared on Naomi's phone. She glanced at the screen and read only 3 words. "Almost here now." For the first time all afternoon, she stood from her chair and picked up her carry-on. Around Gate B17, heads turned. Something in her posture had changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Whatever she had been waiting for was no longer somewhere else in the airport. It was getting very close. Melissa Grant felt the mood of Gate B17 shifting against her. Earlier, every glance had supported her authority. Now those same eyes seemed filled with questions. Passengers who had once accepted her explanations without hesitation were beginning to examine them more closely. The confidence she projected no longer carried the same weight. Facts had a way of doing that. Across the gate area, Naomi Carter remained seated, calm and composed. Her patience seemed almost impossible to understand. Every minute that passed without frustration or anger only made her presence more powerful. Melissa hated that. She wanted Naomi to react. She wanted a scene she could point to as justification. Instead, she was left facing a woman whose silence exposed every weakness in the story being told. The boarding process continued, but many travelers were now paying more attention to Naomi than to their flight. A few remained standing near the gate even after their boarding group had been called. Nobody wanted to leave before learning how this situation ended. Jordan Reed returned to the reservation system once again. He already knew what he would find. Still, he checked. Confirmed. Active. Seat 3A. Nothing had changed. He leaned back and exhaled slowly. The evidence was no longer merely convincing. It was overwhelming. Melissa noticed him looking at the screen. "I thought we settled this already," she said. Jordan looked up. "The system does not agree." The response drew another wave of attention from nearby passengers. Melissa's jaw tightened. She walked out from behind the counter and stopped several feet from Naomi. "People like you always think there must be some special exception waiting for them. The rules are the same for everyone," she said. The words landed heavily. Conversation stopped. A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Even those who had supported Melissa earlier seemed uncertain now. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes. For a brief moment, the terminal around her faded into memory. She remembered another airport years ago, another gate, another employee questioning whether she belonged in a premium cabin despite holding a valid ticket. She remembered the embarrassment, the quiet judgment, the feeling of being evaluated before anyone knew her name. Success had changed many things in her life. It had not erased moments like those. The memory disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Naomi focused on Melissa again. "I never asked for special treatment," she said calmly. "I asked for the same treatment everyone else received." The statement cut through the tension with remarkable clarity. Nobody argued. Nobody could. The difference between privilege and fairness suddenly seemed obvious. Melissa opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. Around her, the crowd was no longer reacting the way she expected. The businessman who had doubted Naomi earlier lowered his eyes. The woman near the charging station slowly nodded. Jordan looked toward Naomi with growing respect. The truth was changing people one person at a time. Then Naomi's phone vibrated once more. She looked down at the screen. A short message appeared. Only 4 words. "Everything is in place." Naomi read it, locked the phone, and slipped it back into her bag. For the first time all afternoon, she stood from her chair. The movement instantly captured the attention of everyone nearby. Melissa straightened. Jordan looked up. Dozens of passengers watched. Naomi turned toward the entrance of the concourse. Far in the distance, a small group of people had just appeared. They were moving quickly toward Gate B17. And somehow, before a single face became recognizable, Naomi already knew exactly who was coming. The group moving through the concourse was still too far away for most people to identify, but their presence immediately changed the energy around Gate B17. Naomi Carter watched them approach with quiet certainty. She had been expecting them. Everyone else was simply trying to understand why. Melissa Grant followed Naomi's gaze toward the entrance and narrowed her eyes. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just several people walking quickly through the terminal. Then she noticed something else. Airport employees farther down the concourse were straightening their posture as the group passed. A supervisor stepped aside. Another employee stopped a conversation mid-sentence. Small reactions, subtle reactions, but enough to suggest that someone important was approaching. Jordan Reed noticed it too. He leaned slightly forward from behind the counter. The closer the group came, the more obvious it became that they were not ordinary travelers. They wore business attire rather than airport uniforms. They moved with purpose. Nobody in the group appeared rushed, yet people instinctively cleared a path for them. Around the gate area, passengers began turning their attention away from the boarding door and toward the approaching figures. The curiosity that had been building all afternoon suddenly found a new focus. Naomi remained calm. Melissa did not. The supervisor crossed her arms and attempted to maintain the confidence she had displayed throughout the afternoon. but uncertainty was beginning to show around the edges. For the first time, she seemed unsure of what would happen next. Naomi checked her phone one final time. No new messages. None were necessary. Everything had already been set in motion. Nearby, the businessman who had once doubted her watched carefully. So did the woman near the charging station. So did dozens of other travelers who had become accidental witnesses to a story much larger than a missed flight. The terminal announcements continued overhead, but nobody seemed to hear them anymore. The attention of Gate B17 had narrowed to a single point: the approaching group. Jordan looked from Naomi to the concourse entrance and back again. The pieces were starting to come together. The confidence, the text messages, the patience, the complete absence of panic. None of it had been random. Naomi had never acted like someone trapped by circumstances. She had acted like someone waiting for a scheduled arrival. Melissa stepped closer. "Who are you expecting?" she asked. The question came out more quickly than she intended. Naomi looked at her for a moment. "Someone who values facts." The answer landed softly, but it carried more weight than a raised voice ever could. Melissa looked away first. A murmur moved through the crowd. The approaching group was now close enough for faces to become visible. Several airline employees standing near neighboring gates immediately recognized the man walking at the center and straightened their posture. One employee whispered something to a coworker. Another stared in surprise. The reaction spread faster than words. Jordan felt his stomach tighten. A sudden realization hit him. There was only one reason the chief executive officer of the airline would personally leave a boardroom, cross an airport terminal, and come directly to a boarding gate. Whatever Naomi Carter had been waiting for all afternoon was far bigger than a customer service complaint. He knew that face. Every employee at the airline knew that face. He had seen it in training videos, company newsletters, and annual leadership broadcasts. As recognition hit him, his eyes widened. Across the gate area, Melissa saw the same face a second later. The color seemed to drain from her expression. And standing quietly beside her carry-on bag, Naomi Carter allowed herself the smallest smile of the entire afternoon as the most powerful person in the airline continued walking directly toward Gate B17. William Harrington walked into Gate B17 with the quiet confidence of a man who never needed to announce his authority. The reaction around him did that automatically. Employees standing near neighboring gates immediately straightened. Conversations stopped. Even travelers who did not recognize him sensed that someone important had arrived. Jordan Reed felt his heart racing. There was no doubt in his mind. The man approaching was the chief executive officer of the airline. Beside him walked several senior executives, all moving with purpose. Melissa Grant stared in disbelief. Of every possible outcome she had imagined that afternoon, this was not one of them. William continued forward without hesitation. His eyes moved across the gate area, taking in the waiting passengers, the boarding counter, and the tense atmosphere that seemed frozen in place. Then his attention settled on Naomi Carter. The moment he saw her, his expression changed. The serious executive demeanor softened into genuine recognition. A warm smile appeared. "Naomi," he said as he approached, "I am sorry to keep you waiting." The silence that followed seemed to echo across the entire terminal. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Several passengers looked from William to Naomi and back again, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Naomi smiled politely. "I appreciate you coming." William shook his head. "When I received the message, I came as quickly as I could." The words landed like another shockwave. The message. Suddenly, everyone understood. Naomi had not been waiting helplessly. She had been waiting for him. Melissa felt the ground shifting beneath her. The assumptions that had supported her confidence all afternoon were collapsing one by one. Jordan watched in amazement. Every strange detail suddenly made sense. The patience, the calmness, the complete absence of panic. Naomi had known exactly who was coming. William turned toward the boarding counter. His smile disappeared, not because he was angry, because now he was focused. "Can someone explain why a confirmed passenger was denied boarding?" he asked. The question was calm and professional, yet it carried more weight than any raised voice could have. Nobody answered immediately. Melissa opened her mouth, then hesitated. For the first time that day, she seemed unsure of her own explanation. Jordan finally stepped forward. "Sir, I reviewed the reservation multiple times. It remained active the entire afternoon." William nodded slowly. Thank you. He turned toward Naomi. And your boarding pass was valid? Yes, Naomi replied. From the beginning. Several passengers exchanged looks. The truth was becoming impossible to avoid. William looked around the gate area. He could feel dozens of eyes watching him, waiting, listening. Then he asked a question that changed everything. Does everyone here know who Ms. Carter is? No one answered. Most people shook their heads. William glanced toward Naomi and smiled slightly. Then allow me to introduce her properly. The entire gate seemed to lean forward at once. Melissa felt her stomach tighten. Jordan held his breath. Naomi remained perfectly calm. William looked directly at the crowd. The woman you have been watching all afternoon is Naomi Carter, founder and chief executive officer of Carter Global Technologies. Audible gasps swept through the waiting area. Several passengers immediately recognized the company name. William paused, then continued. But that is not the reason I came here personally today. The silence deepened. Faces turned toward him. Ms. Carter is also the largest outside shareholder of this airline. William allowed the information to settle over the crowd before continuing. During our most difficult financial crisis, when analysts predicted this airline would not survive, Ms. Carter chose to invest when almost nobody else would. Several passengers stared at Naomi in disbelief. William looked around the gate before delivering the final piece of the story. Without Naomi Carter, this airline might not exist today. The reaction was immediate. Shock spread through the crowd. Melissa looked as though she had forgotten how to speak. Nobody spoke. Suddenly, every decision made that afternoon looked very different. The assumptions, the delays, the judgment, all of it now stood beneath a very different light. The reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped. Several passengers who had been casually observing the situation suddenly stared at Naomi Carter with open disbelief. Others recognized the company name instantly. Carter Global Technologies was not a small business. It was one of the most successful technology firms in the country. Yet Naomi remained exactly the same woman they had seen sitting quietly in a chair all afternoon. The only thing that had changed was their understanding of who she was. William Harrington let the silence settle. He had spent enough years leading organizations to understand the power of truth arriving at the right moment. Around Gate B17, assumptions were collapsing faster than anyone could process them. The businessman who had questioned Naomi earlier lowered his eyes. The woman near the charging station shook her head slowly. Even the passengers who had never spoken could feel the weight of what had just been revealed. William turned toward one of the executives standing beside him. Bring up the reservation history and gate activity records, he said. The executive immediately opened a tablet and began reviewing internal data. Within seconds, the information appeared. The reservation had remained active the entire afternoon. The seat assignment had never changed. The booking had never been flagged. Every record supported exactly what Jordan Reed had been saying from the beginning. William reviewed the information carefully. Then he looked toward Jordan. You verified this multiple times? Jordan nodded. Yes, sir. And every check produced the same result? Yes, sir. William smiled slightly. Good work. The acknowledgement visibly boosted Jordan's confidence. For the first time all day, someone in authority had valued facts over assumptions. William then turned toward the crowd. What concerns me is not Ms. Carter's title. His voice remained calm. What concerns me is that she was denied the same fairness every passenger deserves. The statement landed heavily. Naomi watched quietly. She appreciated that distinction. The lesson was never supposed to be about status. It was about dignity. William continued. A respected passenger should not need a famous name to receive respectful treatment. Several travelers nodded. One by one, people began recognizing what had actually happened. The issue had never been a boarding pass. The issue had been perception. Melissa Grant stood silently behind the counter. Earlier, she had seemed completely certain. Now she looked overwhelmed by the reality unfolding around her. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was humiliating her. The facts alone were enough. William handed the tablet back to his executive team. I want a complete review of everything that occurred at this gate today, he said. Document every step and every decision. The executives immediately agreed. Naomi remained composed. She had not demanded punishment. She had not demanded special treatment. She had simply waited for the truth to arrive. Around the gate area, passengers exchanged thoughtful looks. The atmosphere had changed completely. Earlier, there had been suspicion. Now there was reflection. Earlier there had been judgment. Now there was understanding. William looked toward Naomi. "I am sorry this happened." Naomi offered a small smile. "Thank you for coming." William nodded. Then he glanced toward the boarding door and back toward the crowd. The lesson unfolding at Gate B-17 was no longer about one flight. It had become something much larger. And as the reality of the afternoon settled over everyone present, they understood that the most important revelation was not that Naomi Carter was a powerful chief executive officer. The most important revelation was how differently she had been treated before anyone knew. For several moments after William Harrington finished speaking, Gate B-17 remained completely silent. The tension that had dominated the afternoon had disappeared, replaced by something deeper. Reflection. Passengers who had arrived expecting nothing more than an ordinary flight now found themselves thinking about everything they had witnessed. Naomi Carter stood beside her carry-on bag exactly as she had from the beginning. The difference was that now everyone saw her differently. Yet Naomi herself had not changed at all. William glanced toward the boarding door and then back toward the crowd gathered around the gate. "The aircraft will remain available until Ms. Carter is comfortably boarded," he said. Several passengers nodded in approval. Others quietly smiled. The atmosphere felt lighter now, but the lesson remained. Jordan Reed stood near the counter, still processing the events of the afternoon. Earlier, he had simply followed the information in front of him. Now he understood why that mattered. Facts required courage when assumptions became popular. William turned toward him. "Thank you for speaking up when it would have been easier to stay silent." Jordan looked surprised. "I was just doing my job." William smiled. "Strong organizations depend on people who do exactly that." Naomi watched the exchange with appreciation. Throughout her career, she had learned that real leadership often appeared in ordinary moments. Jordan had not known who she was. He had simply chosen truth over convenience. That mattered. Then Naomi slowly turned toward Melissa Grant. The supervisor stood quietly behind the counter. The confidence she had carried earlier was gone. Nobody was accusing her. Nobody was humiliating her. The facts had already done more than enough. Naomi studied her for a moment before speaking. "May I ask you a question?" Melissa looked up. "Yes." Naomi's voice remained calm. "What exactly made you decide I did not belong?" The entire gate seemed to hold its breath. Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked toward the floor, then toward the counter, then toward William. No answer came, because there was no reservation issue, no system warning, no policy violation, only an assumption made before the facts were known. The silence stretched for several seconds. Every person standing nearby understood it. Naomi nodded once. "That is what I thought." The sentence landed harder than any argument could have. Melissa lowered her eyes. Around the gate area, several passengers exchanged thoughtful looks. The businessman who had doubted Naomi earlier looked embarrassed. The woman near the charging station quietly shook her head. Everyone understood the real issue now. Naomi picked up her carry-on bag and walked toward the boarding lane. Travelers instinctively stepped aside. Not because she was wealthy, not because she was famous. They stepped aside because respect had finally replaced judgment. Before entering the jet bridge, Naomi paused and turned back one last time. "Every person deserves respect before they prove their value," she said. Not after. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The meaning was already clear. Naomi offered a small smile to Jordan, nodded politely to William, and then disappeared into the jet bridge. A few moments later, airport life slowly resumed. Announcements returned. Conversations restarted. Travelers continued toward their destinations. Yet long after the aircraft climbed above the clouds on its way to Seattle, many people who had witnessed that afternoon would remember the woman who never raised her voice, never demanded special treatment, and never needed to. Because in the end, the truth had spoken louder than assumptions ever could.